Hi everybody, this is Philip Carl. In this session, I'm going to share with you how Zero Trust for users start by validating users with strong authentication. Identity is the first key pillar in the use case of Zero Trust for users, focusing on validating users with strong authentication. Identity plays a very important role in Zero Trust and it participates in multiple phases of Zero Trust. Identity starts with validation. Validate the identity of the user. Then you create identity-based policy rules to control access based on users, applications, and devices. You can reduce the attack surface by limiting which users have access and what resources. You can also write consistent policies that follow users wherever they go, for instance, in headquarters, branch, coffee shop, home, park, etc. You can dynamically allow or disallow time-bound access. On top of the above, you can automate security actions based on users' behavior to restrict suspicious or malicious users being dynamic user group. Last but not least, you can prevent no attack, stolen credential, get users' contacts in logs, and forensic capability for users-based analysis with reports. Security teams usually rely on user group information stored in on-prem Active Directory such as Microsoft Active Directory or Cloud Directory like Okta, Azure AD, Ping Identity, Google Security, etc. to write user group-based security control. Until a few years ago, users came to the office to work, access internet application, and on-prem identity sources such as Microsoft Active Directory were sufficient to address an organization need. As a result, deploying user-based policies were fairly straightforward. On-prem identity providers or Microsoft Active Directory observed comprehensive adoption across enterprise customers over the last several years. But today, identity has federated to the clouds and organizations use various applications like SaaS application in the data center, in the public clouds. With an unbounded workforce, it is getting harder to keep security and identity connected and in sync between clouds, campus, data center, and hybrid identity store. Identity has broken or disparated, and customers are having a hard time managing identities. Let me give you one example of identity for Zero Trust. Before, customers using Palo Alto Networks firewall using IP addresses as an approximation for users, groups, and applications. After, with Palo Alto Networks Next-Generation Firewall, customers now can drive policy based on users and application and no longer need to write policy using IP addresses, which are very challenging to manage and a poor approximation for specific users and groups. With visibility into users' behaviors and not just IP, you can identify the top users and the browsing history, the top application accessed by any users within the past 24 hours, and the SaaS application uses by the user group. There are two types of identity access management or IAM. The first time is the on-prem identity provider, like your local database, the LDAP or Active Directory. The second time is the cloud identity provider. For instance, Okta, Azure AD, Ping Identity, Google Security, etc. Most organizations have multiple on-prem and cloud single sign-on SSO solutions for different use cases and purposes. For instance, you can use on-prem Active Directory and or Azure Active Directory to authenticate and apply the policies to the users who go to the internet and the SaaS application. while leveraging Okta to authenticate and apply the policy to the users who access your application hosted on the public cloud, and use ping identity to authenticate your partner, your contractor, or alliances who need to access your application and services hosted on your virtual data center or private cloud. So here is our approach to help authenticate and authorize users with ease. We are introducing the first ever Cloud Identity Engine, or CIE. Once configured, and CIEs pull incremental directory information, only the changes on the consistent intervals. For next-generation firewall, CIE pulls information for every 5 minutes. For XDR, CIE pull information every hours, and with Prisma Access, pull information every 15 minutes. CIE synchronize users, group, and authentication data across all the firewall products in different form factor, hardware, virtual, cloud deliver, panoramas from a single point, etc. The Cloud Identity Engine. With Cloud Identity Engine, you can easily identify and verify all the user group across the infrastructure and achieve the zero trust. Enable and secure identity irrespective of whether they are using on-prem, cloud hybrid, or multi-cloud identity sources with minimal effort. We are the only vendor that can offer MFA across both cloud application and on-prem hosted application, enabling MFA authentication across all users and applications. Previously, customers would use the Palo Alto Networks MFA for on-premise application and Okta for cloud MFA for cloud application. But now, customers can implement and manage MFA from a single point in respect of on-prem or the cloud IDP. With CIE help to enable identity across infrastructure. You configure once and CIE put incremental directory information only for the changes. No additional changes required for additional IDP when you use it more in the future. It's also maintenance free. No need to make changes on your infrastructure as identity providers made the changes. All the changes by identity of providers, any update by identity provider or changes in authentication protocol of directory do not require additional configuration on each firewall, management, and endpoint. Now let me give you a more detail on how CIE works for the use case of simplifying identity-based group policy. We have multiple security devices in our environment, like the firewall, the management devices, the endpoint like Global Protect or Cortex XDR, and detection and response platform. Because of that, we have a problem today. User and group information is present in multiple identity provider or IDP, and the security teams want to write the policies to give user access to the right application and limit the usage of unwanted applications. Managing and keeping users' information in sync is highly complicated. Every time a user is added, moved, or terminated, the network security teams have to manually update the policy. Customers have to manually pull the users and user group information with the API and then push them on the next generation firewall, and that's with no synchronization of the user's information. Now, our Cloud Identity Engine automatically pull the users and group information from multiple IDP and make it available for the next generation firewall to include it in the policy. Security team do not need to do anything as the users and the group information is always in sync in the Cloud Identity Engine. Cloud Identity Engine is a global deployment, and we are starting with 8 global locations, as you can see here, including the US FedRAMP, and we are continuing to expand in other locations. in JAPAC region. Cloud Identity Engine has location in Australia, India, Japan, and Singapore. So how can we protect identity with Zero Trust? You can enforce the Zero Trust authentication by using multi-factor authentication or MFA. MFA can work across users, devices, location, and for different business use cases, and make Zero Trust authentication actionable and simple. So now we will prevent Joe from leaking his corporate credential. But Joe is being Joe. He used his corporate password on his social media account as well. And what happened if the social media provider get hacked? And so now the attacker has Joe's password despite your best effort to protect it. The attacker now used Joe's password to get access to some critical financial application, some of which are new modern application and others are legacy as application. The next generation firewall look at the request and say, well, this is one of the critical application marked by the administrator. So the next generation firewall send a multi-factor authentication request via your existing MFA vendor. This MFA's request go to the Joe phone, and of course, he denied this transaction. So now, the next generation firewall have prevented the attacker from exploiting the Joe's stolen credential to access sensitive data, and all this had been done in an automated fashion without your manual intervention. And this attempt has been recorded for logging and reporting purposes as well. We protect Joe against this attack in a variety of ways. For the thousands of attempted phishing attacks every day are blocked and never even reach Joe. Based on user capability of our user and URL filtering and malware analysis. But what if there's a very targeted attack that specially target Joe and use a new phishing website that had never been seen before? In that case, Joe would get the email that seemed to be legitimate coming from his IT department, click the link which take him to a fake page that look exactly like his organization's single sign-on page. Since Joe is not very security savvy, he entered his corporate credential, and now what we do, which is really unique in the industry, is that we look at the traffic flowing through the firewall and realize that the valid corporate credentials are flowing out to the new website which has no business relevance. And that's when we block the credential and show a notification page to Joe that explains why we block the transaction and why he should be more careful, because now his credential can be compromised. Note that we do that using our integration with AD, Active Directory, without ever receiving the password in ClearStat from Joe, and instead only by comparing the password hashes. Last but not least, let me recap at how we can remove the implied trust in a credential-based attack in each and every phases of it. Phase number one, we stop access when users try to access to the public phishing site. Phase number two, we prevent the submission when users try to submit their corporate credential. Phase number three, we can detect and respond to attacker behavior when the attacker infiltrates and try to move laterally. Phase number four, we enforce MFA for all sensitive applications when users access sensitive resources and try to exfiltrate the data. Thank you very much for spending your time with my session, and I do hope that you now can understand how we can apply Zero Trust in identity and make it actionable and simple. Now, please allow me to introduce the next speaker, Leonard Kleinman, to share with you how we can verify users' device identity and integrity. Over to you, Leonard.